wanted to welcome you to the Classics in Archaeology Learning Community Series. I am Katerina Zakaria, Professor of Classics, and this is a series that I invite you to participate in. And if you're interested, you can sign up for the course, which is CLAR 4400, Classics in Archaeology Learning Community Series. We usually have a couple or three events that are student or student run, or in this case we had alums and then student reports on the 13th, and an event with faculty and students on December 4th, and three lectures. The last one was a book launch by our own faculty, Dr. Jordan Christopher. Yes, and congratulations again. And today it is with great joy that I invite Dr. Dan Turkeltaub to speak to us. I want to say about Dr. Turkeltaub that he was our external examiner for this department that helped us a lot with strategy and envisioning where we want to be. So I'm grateful for that. Professor Turkeltaub is an associate professor of classics at Santa Clara University. He's a classical philologist whose teaching and research focus on Greek epic, comedy, and tragedy. He has published articles about Euripides' Hecuba, humor in the Odyssey, and how formulaic composition contributes to thematic development in Homeric poetry. Some of his publications include Perceiving Iliadic Gods, Penelope's Stout Hand, and Odyssean Humor, and Reading the Epic Past, the Iliad and Heroic Epic. He earned his PhD from Cornell University a few years after earning his AB from Princeton University. The title of the talk is Homer's Slippery Songs, Odysseus' Mighty Hand, and the Fall of Glorious Ajax. And you'll see that we'll explore a passage from each of Homeric epics that contains ludicrously inappropriate formula. So let me invite Professor Turkeltaub to speak to us.
Thank you all for coming today. I really am honored by your presence. So today we're going to spend about an hour, I think, learning about Homeric poetics. And I'm more than happy to answer questions when we are done. So the title of the talk, I hope you'll keep in mind as we progress, because it's got a few things going on in there. I'm going to take it as given that we're familiar with what the Iliad and the Odyssey are and the fact that they are oral poems. And what I mean by that is not just that they were sung as oral performances, but also, hey, come on in, come on. But also that at some point in their development, I don't want to get into stages of when, they were actually composed using particular oral techniques. We're going to look at some of those today. We'll look at the effects of that, actually. So, first unit in the talk, Homer's song. So we know that Homeric epics, as well as other types of archaic hexameter poems, were performed by types of performers called rhapsodes, rhapsodoi in Greek. And while the name is phonologically evocative of the rhabdos, the staff that you see the rhapsode on the far side of the screen carrying, the word actually probably means song stitcher. And not just because these poets would stitch together one song after another. We do have evidence at the ends of some of, for instance, the Homeric hymns that the poet is expected to sing another song, but also because at some stage in the development of these poems, the artists, the rhapsodes, were stitching together the verses themselves as they were performing. Okay? So, how do we know that? Well, I'm going to read in Greek the first 7 lines of the Iliad. And I want you to listen carefully to the rhythms, okay? Because the rhythm is going to be everything as we progress through this talk. Meinina ereteia, pelei adiau acheleos, ulomenein hemuria kaiois alge eteke, polas diftimus psukasa idi proeapsin heroon, autuste heloria tauche kunesin, oionoisi tapasi, dios de teleia tobule, ex hude ta prota diaste te neresante, atre ides te anaxandron, kai dios achilleus. Okay, you may have heard the rhythm there. Bum ba ba 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 bum bum. Right? Okay. Now, this is the meter in which oral poetry in the archaic Greek world was composed. And I see Chris nodding, shaking his head, looking back to his students, saying, yeah, we covered this, we're good. It's called dactylic hexameter. And the reason why it's called dactylic hexameter is because it consists of hexameter, 6 metra, each of which is a dactyl. That's a long syllable followed by 2 short syllables. It's named dactyl because it's shaped like your finger. The word dactylos means finger, so it's got a long bone with 2 short bones. Okay? And any time in Greek or Roman poetry where we see 2 longs, 2 shorts, they can often coalesce into a single long syllable because 1 long syllable takes about as much time to pronounce as 2 short syllables do. So we get a combination of dactyls, dun-da-da, and what are called spondies, which are just 2 long syllables, dun-dun. Okay? We get 6 of those in combination, and we get a dactylic hexameter. Yay! All right. But we need to get a little bit more complex than that. So here is the last of the lines that I read to you, and it's actually one of my favorite lines in all of Homeric poetry. We look at it again. Atre ides te anaxandron, kai dios achilleus. Now, you may have noticed I paused halfway through, right? I did that very purposefully because there is a pause there. First, we can scan the line. That's what it looks like. And now I'm going to mark the pauses. Okay? A pause in the middle of a foot we call a caesura, which means a cutting. And a pause that coincides with the end of a foot or metron we call a diaeresis, which means a breaking through. Okay? Now, these are not just arbitrary pauses. They almost always occur at certain very specific points in a verse. For example, you will notice that the first caesura, which is a minor caesura in this line, comes after the 3rd half foot, or 3rd and a quarter. 1, 2, 3 half feet. Whoop, there's a pause. Okay, it comes after the short, but that's okay. That doesn't matter. Many come after the 5th half foot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one doesn't have one there because this is a single phrase. They often come after the 7th half foot. 6, 7. We got one there. And then this one is so common, so popular, it actually has a special name called the bucolic diaeresis. Okay? Now, as I said, these are not just arbitrary. These are actually the phrases of metrical composition. So that even though we think of these verses in terms of feet, dun-da-da, and lines, dactylic hexameter, that's not how the oral poets thought of it. They thought in terms of dactylic phrases of various length. Here's one phrase. Here's our second phrase. Here's our third phrase. And that's how they're putting these verses together. Make sense, everybody? So these are our elements of composition. Okay, cool. Why I love this verse so much is because, as the previous verse says, that Achilles and Agamemnon stood apart in strife, we can see that the next verse, this verse, actually sets them apart in strife across the caesura. It's a gorgeous line, with also Dios Achilleus, godly Achilles, divine Achilles, after the bucolic diaeresis is really set off strongly. It's just an absolutely beautiful line. All right. Now, when I say metrical phrases, the poets really were using these as building blocks to compose their poems with. I will demonstrate. Let's say a poet gets to the end of a line, and all he has left is da-dun-dun to finish up the verse. And he wants to say Achilles' name in the nominative as the subject. Okay? He can say Achilleus. What if he has from the bucolic diaeresis to the end? Now he's got Dios Achilleus to fill that spot. Okay, what if the spot is even longer? Podasocus Achilleus. What if it's even longer? Podarches Dios Achilleus. And he even has an entire verse line that he can use if he wants to take the entire verse basically to present Achilles as the subject of a sentence. Diogenes peleos huios podos ocus Achilleus. Yeah? Okay. Now, not only can he take one name, or could they take one name, and extend it throughout a verse, but these formulas, as we'll call them, are also more versatile. Here I present four names, each with an epithet, an adjective attached to them, that enables the poet to complete that space between the bucolic diaeresis and the end of the verse, which is almost always, it's called an Adonic, and it almost takes the shave and a haircut, almost always takes the shave and a haircut rhythm. Dun, 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 dun. No. So we see Dios Achilleus, godly Achilles. Phoebus Apollon, Pallas Athene, Paidimos Hector. Right? And notice they all have exactly the same rhythm. They're all different epithets, though, all different adjectives based on the different names. See it? Good. Well, because this meter works on patterns of long and short syllables, it also matters whether a formula begins with a vowel or a consonant, because that'll change the length of the syllable in front of it. So we also need epithets, different formulas, based on whether we need to start with a consonant or a vowel. So if we look at Zeus's name, for instance, we have Metia Tasdaus and also Pasdaus. One starts with a consonant, one starts with a vowel, depending on what kind of sound the previous word ends with and what kind of, whether we need a long or short before it. Okay? Some names just simply don't fit into that spot. Okay? The poets have a workaround. Diomedes' name doesn't fit. So instead, we have Tudeus Huios, son of Tydeus. That fits. We're good. And we just call him the son of Tydeus whenever we want to say his name in that position. Right? Okay. Now, most of these epithets, or many of these epithets, are specific to that character. If you look at Apollo, nobody else is Phoebos. Okay, Artemis can be Phoebe, but nobody is Phoebos. Athena, nobody is Pallas except Athena. In fact, you can even just use Pallas as her name. But you'll notice Odysseus. His name has the exact same metrical shape as Achilles does. Achilleus, Odysseus, right? They both start with a vowel. They can both take the same epithet, Dios, when in this metrical spot. Right? Make sense? Cool. We call those epithets generic epithets because they can apply to many, many names. Basically, anybody with a name of that metrical shape can be Dios. So, question. If oral poets use formulas as metrical building blocks, and their choice of formulas depends heavily on the metrical shape of the verse, not on what the words actually mean, do oral poets ever use formulas with meanings that do not suit the passages they are used in? And the answer is, quite emphatically and quite notoriously, absolutely yes. Let's look at some very famous examples. Our first one. This happens all the time in the Iliad. Professor Zakaria is nodding her head like, yeah, I've seen this so many times. Yes. Achilles is, as we saw, often podos ocus Achilleus, swift-footed Achilles. What about when he's sitting down talking to somebody? Yeah, the poet still uses that verse, right? Ton dapame babanos prosape podos ocus Achilleus. Yeah, he's still swift-footed when he's sitting down, right? Not moving. And can we come up with reasons? Yes. Some scholars, whom we'll call hard paryists, except I might not use the term again in this talk, that's okay, argue based on this that the epithets have no real meaning whatsoever, that they're just space fillers. Other scholars say, no, those epithets still have meaning here. This one happens to be used indicating the vibrant energy and potential that is currently stored up in Achilles as he waits for his moment to surge back onto the battlefield as he sits there biding his time, waiting for the right moment. Okay, Maybe. Here's another one. Zeus mentions Perithous. Does anybody know who this guy is? Well, Zeus describes him as Peritoon Theophin Mestor Atalanton. Perithous, counselor equal to the gods. Perithous is known for many things, but being a wise counselor is definitely not one of them. Perithous is the guy who went to his buddy Theseus and said, hey, you know what would be a great idea we should do? Let's go down to the underworld and rape Persephone, the queen of the underworld, the goddess of the underworld. Yeah, bad idea. It got Perithous stuck on a bench in the underworld for eternity. He's also the same guy who said, you know what would be a really good idea if I invited the centaurs to my wedding. The centaurs then proceeded to get drunk and attack the women at the wedding, and there was a big war between the Lapis and the centaurs because of it. Not the best. He's like your drunk frat bro, right? Who always has the crazy ideas you never ever want to listen to because you know disaster will follow. That's Perithous. That's the guy Zeus calls counselor equal to the gods because that happens to fit the metrical structure. Okay. Scholars argue, fine. Zeus is being ironic or sarcastic. Maybe. Okay? Zeus recalls in the Odyssey Aegisthus, mentions him right in the first book, and blames him for seducing Clytemnestra. Oh, if only the humans blame us gods for their troubles, but really, if they just listen to us. We told him not to seduce Clytemnestra, and look what the jerk did. He went ahead and seduced Clytemnestra, and he goes on to blame him. Okay, but the line before he starts talking about Aegisthus is Nesa togar katatumon amumonos Aegistoio, for he remembered in his heart blameless Aegisthus. Okay, some scholars argue, yeah, but you see that word there, amumonos, blameless, it doesn't actually mean blameless. We've got our etymology messed up. It doesn't come from that root. It's a different root. It means something like skillful. He's still not skillful. Okay, but fine. Let's keep going. Nausicaa takes the dirty laundry to the shore to wash. It's filthy. Kure dektalamoyo peren este tafaening. The girl from the chamber brought the shining clothing. It's filthy. Why is it shining? Here's one I've written about, as you mentioned in my Penelope grabs the key to unlock the room where the bow is kept. And she grabbed the well-bent key with her stout hand. This one has been a very controversial verse. Some people argue, Katie Paquet, why does she have a stout hand? And some people have argued, well, it was the aesthetic for women to be burly. If you do some comparative Homeric work, it actually was not. Paquet, the word pacus, that adjective, is not a compliment when applied to women. It's just not. The only woman, female character who is Paquet and it's not insulting is Athena, who is, when she's fighting, and it's so, Athena is also so massive when she's fighting that she causes Diomedes' chariot to creak when she steps on it. Meanwhile, Aphrodite and Artemis, to whom Penelope is explicitly compared, are described as having slender hands, slender wrists. So something's going on there. All right. Now, as I said, hard parists look at this and say, this demonstrates the epithets have no real meaning. They're just metrical fillers. Soft parists will come up with excuses for, as I was indicating, why these epithets are actually appropriate for these contexts, either because the poet is being sarcastic or ironic, or because we misunderstand what they mean. But it's hard to misunderstand este tafaening, gleaming clothing, when the clothing is filthy. So, other scholars have taken a slightly different approach based on an idea that was originally presented by Albert Bates Lord and then much, much further developed by John Miles Foley, principally in two books, Immanent Art and Homer's traditional art. And this is the idea of traditional referentiality. And what traditional referentiality is, the concept, is that formulas and other formulaic structures, such as type scenes, that regularly occur in particular thematic contexts or regular sets of circumstances, can evoke the themes or circumstances of their regular contexts when deployed, potentially even when deployed in passages that do not otherwise display those themes or concepts. In other words, that those Homeric formulae that I was showing you can function like idioms in a natural language to convey meaning that they acquire through regular usage in particular contexts. It's taking that idea that this is oral poetry, and that Homer was using, and the other archaic poets were using, basically their own subdialect that had not only its own grammatical forms, but also its own grammar and its own vocabulary and its own idioms that it evolved. And it's to look at these again from that perspective. All right. Make sense, everybody? So let's do that. So we're going to move on to part one, the Iliad, the fall of glorious Ajax. I'm going to return to this list of epithets. Right? You remember this? These are the Adonic line ends. Dun, 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 dun. 2 bits. And I want to focus on this one right here. Phaidemos, that adjective. Okay? Now, phaidemos etymologically probably derives from a word that refers to like the clear, bright sky, shining, radiant, resplendent. And then from that, it probably extends metaphorically to mean something like, I translate it as glorious. Right? Famous. I'm not crazy about famous. Glorious is better. And the reason why I prefer glorious is because in Homeric poetry, kudos, that glory of victory, often appears physically as a glowing radiance. And heroes, even when they are in their aristeia, will often glow as a representation of that kudos. It was Bonveniste who pointed that out. All right. So let's look at how this adjective is used. Well, it may come as no surprise. Come on in. No, come in. Come on, come on, come on. Have a seat. You missed the best part, though. All right. It may come as no surprise that the majority of times the word phaidemos appears is in the Iliad and describes Hector, 29 times, which represents about 14.4% of the time his name appears in the nominative case. In other words, in that form, in the subject case, Hector. Because Greek words take on different forms based on their function in the sentence. So when Hector is the subject of the sentence, his name appears with the word phaidemos 14.4% of the time. Okay? 29 instances. We're good?
Yep.
All right. Next instance. He's not the only one to be called phaidemos, however. When Achilles' name appears in the vocative, in other words, when somebody's talking directly at him, he can also be called phaidemos. That happens 4 times in the Iliad, 1 time in the Odyssey, but you'll notice that of all the times he's actually addressed, he's called phaidemos 14.3% of the time, which is a remarkably similar, actually, to that 14.4% for Hector. Okay. Now, these two figures, before we move on, you may notice something in common if you've read the Iliad. Why these two figures? You need to ask that. There are other figures with these names, with these names of this metrical shape. Why these two? Who are these two? These are our two principal figures in the Iliad. These are the two who mediate, navigate, negotiate that tension, that drama between life and death and kleos, between concerns for family and one's own self-preservation and the need to establish oneself and one's reputation in the world to create a presence. It's Hector and Achilles. The Iliad is the tragedy of Hector and Achilles. It's these two guys. They're the only, and they're phaidemos. Okay. Well, in the vocative, Odysseus can also be Phaidemos. But notice, never once in the Iliad is he Phaidemos. But he's Phaidemos 5 times in the Odyssey. Why? Who's the principal figure in the Odyssey? It's Odysseus. Why isn't he ever called that in the Iliad, though? Not the principal figure in the Iliad. Notice Phaidemos is doing something. It's not just an empty epithet. Now, we also have the combination Phaidemos huios, which means resplendent sun. It occurs sometimes in the Iliad, and actually one of those times refers to Hector. But it occurs 10 times in the Odyssey. 8 of those times is Telemachus. Who's Telemachus? That's Odysseus' son. If there is a second male figure about whom the Odyssey is a story of Telemachus' maturation at least as much, and his coming of age, at least as much, if not more than it is the story of Odysseus' Nostos. He's 8 times. By the way, one of those other times that the word resplendent sun appears in the Odyssey is about Neoptolemus, Achilles' son. Okay. Notice the trend. But then we have this. Phaidemos Aias, resplendent Ajax, which doesn't occur with the frequency that Achilles, Hector, or Odysseus does, but it's not a one-off thing either. It's 6 times, 6.3%. The word Aias appears in the nominative. He's Phaidemos also. And then there are some others. So Phaidemaguia, when warriors usually die or are beaten, sometimes they can be called Phaidemaguia. Again, this Phaidemaguia is also Patroclus, has glorious limbs when he goes down. One of those also refers to Hector. So there's some overlap here. But notice that most of the others are actually in Hesiodic poetry or the hymns or something like that. Okay. So, and then, when not in the bucolic diaeresis, we also see Phaidemos used 3 other times, twice in the Odyssey, Phaidemos huios, that same idiom, but earlier in the verse, in reference to Amphinomus. And one of those lines may be spurious. Does anybody know who Amphinomus is? Amphinomus is the one suitor who is amphinomos, who sort of is kind of ambivalent and speaks against the greater abuses of the other suitors. Right? So if any of them is going to be called Phaidemos, it makes sense that it would maybe be him. Okay. Phaidematoxa, by the way, is in the Homeric hymn to Apollo, and that's Apollo's bow. So, who is this guy Ajax that he, of all the characters who are not major, who are not the principal characters in the epics, warrants the epithet Phaidemos? Well, Ajax is son of Telamon, lord of Salamis, the wall of the Achaeans. After Achilles, Homer calls him the greatest of the Achaean warriors. He happens to be Achilles' cousin, and we have this absolutely spectacular vase by Exechias with Achilles and Ajax playing dice. Ajax is more than just a powerful warrior. He is a giant of a man. He is a defensive bulwark who defends his comrades. He cares about his comrades. He's one of the most sympathetic characters in the Iliad. When a character needs defending, it's often Ajax who does it. Ajax is the last man defending the ships while the Trojans rush to burn it. Ajax is the one who leads the charge to rescue Patroclus' body and fights off the Trojans almost single-handedly, while Menelaus comes and pulls the body away. This is Ajax. Ajax, when you want one person to stand up and defend the Achaeans, it's Ajax. But Ajax has a very tragic story. So, after Achilles dies fighting, it's Ajax and Odysseus who rescue the body. In an inversion of what happens with Patroclus, where Ajax stands and defends the body while Menelaus comes and pulls it away. After Achilles dies in the post-Iliadic Trojan stories, Odysseus defends the body of Achilles, while Ajax lifts it up and carries it away. This is an evocation. It calls back to something their fathers did. Their fathers, Achilles and Ajax's father, Telamon and Peleus, were brothers. And in the Caledonian boar hunt, Peleus fell and was injured, and Telamon fell and was injured, and Peleus came, picked him up, and carried him away to safety. So here the sons are inverting what their fathers did. But it's Ajax who did that. And when they got back, after rescuing the body of Achilles, there was a debate, because Achilles had this divine armor that Hephaestus had made. Who would get that armor? And there was a debate between Odysseus and Ajax in front of the Achaean army. And the Achaean army would decide. In some versions, the Achaean army decides, in some versions, it's just Agamemnon, who decides who wins the debate. Whoever wins the debate gets the armor. Athena, the goddess Athena, wanted Odysseus to get the armor. What we know about the epic cycle from Proclus says this. And inspired Odysseus with eloquence, and Odysseus, with Athena's help, won the debate. The armor was awarded to him. Ajax was furious. Ajax was Achilles' cousin. Ajax was the wall of the Achaeans. Ajax had sacrificed so much to defend the Achaeans. Ajax had rescued the body. Ajax knew he was a better warrior than Odysseus. He deserved the armor, he thought. So he decided to defend his honor. Come on in. No? Bummer. Yeah, okay. In order to defend his honor, to establish his kleos, to make sure he wasn't humiliated and besmirched by losing out to Odysseus, he decided he was going to murder Odysseus and Agamemnon and Menelaus. Athena made him go crazy. He instead attacked the cows and the sheep that the Achaeans had, slaughtered them, and when he came back to his senses, he was so humiliated, so distraught, and so afraid of being ridiculed that he kills himself. And here is another absolutely spectacular vase by our same master of black fairy, Exekias, who is a master of depicting not necessarily the moments of drama, but the moments anticipating the key moments. So here we see Ajax planting a sword in the ground. It happens to be Hector's sword in the ground before leaping on it and committing suicide. This is Ajax. And if any character deserves to be Phaidemos in the Iliad, we can understand why his story resonates with the same kind of drama, the same kind of issues that Achilles and Hector's stories resonate with. Okay, so when is Ajax called Phaidemos in the Iliad? Well, first, after seeing Hector kill two Achaeans, Ajax goes after Amphion, one of the Trojans, and kills him, and then goes to strip off his armor. That's the Ajax we know. He's avenging his comrades. He pities them. In Iliad 7, the Achaeans drew lots for who would duel against Hector. A herald walks around showing each Achaean who volunteered the lot that was drawn to see if it was his, until the herald reaches the man who put that lot in the drawing, Phaidemos. And the Achaeans rejoice because that's the person they wanted to fight against Hector in this duel. In Iliad 11, after killing 5 Trojans, including one a son of Priam, Phaidemos rushes forward through the Trojan forces like a torrential river swollen by rains, carries away oak and pine trees as it rushes down a mountainside. Phaidemos kills Caletor as Caletor is rushing forward with a torch to set fire to the Achaean ships. This is him defending those ships so that the Achaeans can survive and maybe at some point make it back home. Book 17. When the Trojans push the Achaeans back from the body of Patroclus, this is the moment we were talking about, and are on the verge of capturing that Phaidemos charges, scatters the Trojan ranks just like a wild boar charges and scatters hunting dogs. This is Phaidemos. And finally, during the funeral games for Patroclus, Phaidemos claims his second place prize in the foot race, which he lost because he slipped face first into cow dung. Huh? Okay, we need to look at this a little more closely, right? Because something's weird, something's going wrong here. And least of all, the fact that somebody with a face full of cow crap is Phaidemos? Okay, what's going on? We need to look at this more closely. Like I said, so let's look at that passage. So, here Achilles is setting up the foot race. The son of Peleus quickly began setting other prizes for speed. A silver mixing bowl, well wrought. There's a description of the mixing bowl we don't need. Then for second place, he set a cow, large and rich with fat. So the second place prize is a cow. This is established first. And a half talent of gold for last place, he said. Okay? Now the contestants step up. Thus Achilles spoke and immediately rushed up. O Ileostakusaias, swift Ajax, son of Oileus, and very clever Odysseus, and then the son of Nestor, Antilochus, for he, in contrast, bested all young men in his feet. So that's why it's not Telamonian Ajax at all that's Phaidemos in this passage. It's Ajax, the son of Oileus. Okay, well, who's that? Well, Homer has this to say about him, which is probably his best backhanded compliment I've found. So at the end of a list of Trojans whom the Greeks are killing, as the Trojans are in flight, Homer says, Ajax killed the most men, Ajax the swift son of Oileus, for nobody was equal to him at following with his feet when men flee, and when Zeus drives fear among them. He's the best at killing soldiers when they're running away. Ajax, son of Oileus, is not the wall of the Achaeans. Ajax, son of Oileus, is an asshole. His most famous exploit occurs during the sack of Troy, when he pursues Cassandra, Priam's daughter, into a sanctuary of Athena. As she is hanging on to the wooden statue of Athena that's there, he pulls her off the statue and rapes her. That is his most famous exploit. Then, when the Achaeans are leaving, Athena is so furious at the sacrilege that Ajax committed that she sends a massive storm that scatters the Greek fleet. Ajax manages to survive, climbs up on a rock and boasts and says, not even the gods can take me down, at which point Athena takes him down and hits him with a lightning bolt and kills him, or in some versions she gets Poseidon to do it. And that's the death of Ajax. So heinous was Ajax's rape of Cassandra that the people of Locris, where he's from, for 1,000 years after, every year sent 2 girls to Troy, who would live there forever, supposedly, after that, the rest of their lives, to serve Athena there. The first girls that arrived, the Trojans killed to appease Athena for his outrage. This is Ajax and Oileus. Oh, and beyond that, he's like an archer. He wears a linen tunic. He doesn't stand and fight. He's okay. So, you got the figure? This, by the way, is the only time, as you saw, this character is ever called Phaidemos. Or, well, why? Let's continue looking at the race, and we'll see. So, thus, we already did this, right? We have our contestants step forward. We continue. Now, towards the end of the race, but when indeed they were reaching the end of the course, then Odysseus prayed to gray-eyed Athena throughout his heart, listen, goddess, as good to me helper come, so come to me as a good helper for my 2 feet. Okay? And Athena comes and makes him swift-footed so that he can catch Ajax, but it's too late in the race. So, without Odysseus asking, she does something else. But when indeed they were quickly about to rush upon the prize, then Ajax slipped while running, for Athena struck him, right where the cow dung had been poured of the slaughtered loud-mooing cows, which in honor of Patroclus, swift-footed Achilles slaughtered. So then, and inside with bovine dung was filled Ajax's mouth and nostrils. Then the mixing bowl he lifted up, much enduring Odysseus did, since he came in first, But the cow he took, resplendent Ajax did. And so notice what Homer does. He sets up the second place prize as the cow so that Ajax, who slips in cow dung, gets his face full, his nostrils. Imagine what that's like. Your nostrils are now filled with cow dung, gets, of course, a cow as a second place prize. And it's in that specific context that he's called Phaidamos Ayaz. What's going on? Okay. After that, he then stood, held the horns of the cow between his hands, and while still spitting out dung, among the Argives he said, "Oh, alas, surely the goddess hurt me in the feet. She, who even before this, like a mother, keeps standing beside Odysseus and helping him." So he said, and then all the people laughed at him with pleasure. Okay? Now, I want you to think about the elements of this race. And think about the two stories of Ajax that I told you. Notice that scholars have said that this slip and fall foreshadows the death of Ajax, son of Oileus. And it does. But notice how many elements match up, not with the death of Ajax, son of Oileus, but with the death of Ajax, son of Telamon, who is the one who is always Phaidamos Ayaz, or normally Phaidamos Ayaz, whereas Ajax, son of Oileus, never is Phaidamos Ayaz. Ajax bested by Odysseus? Not Oileus, but yes for Telamonides. Athena helps Odysseus by harming Ajax? Yup. Athena leads Ajax to fall. Yes, he falls on the sword. Ajax derides those whom Athena helps win. Yeah, the son of Telamon does that too, according to Sophocles. Ajax humiliated and becomes a target of ridicule. And most spectacularly, we have cows involved. Oh, we certainly do with that Ajax, but not with this one. So what's going on? Okay, yet further evidence. Here's the order of the funeral games. Notice where the foot race is positioned. Notice what happens right before the foot race. The wrestling match, which is the wrestling match between Ajax and Odysseus, which scholars have said foreshadows the death of Ajax. So we have Telamonian Ajax. So we have the foreshadowing of the death of Telamonian Ajax, and then we have that foot race we just looked at immediately after. Okay. Let's put this together and draw some specific conclusions to the foot race. 1. Ajax's fall in the foot race is humorous, and we can look at the linguistics here and compare it with linguistic theory and see how it works, but I don't think we have time for that. But at the same time, it brings both Ajax's own future death and, most directly through the Phaidamos Ayaz phrase, the death of Ajax, son of Telamon, into the minds of audience members skilled at understanding Homer's oral poetic language. I'd emphasize two simultaneous effects from this conflation of narratives, or superimposition of narratives. 1, recreating Ajax, son of Telamon, dying for his heroic ideals as Ajax, son of Oileus, slipping face first and open mouth into cow dung, portrays Ajax's death, and hence the quest for heroic nobility and Kleos itself as absurd, here by an existential technical definition. In other words, it degrades Ajax's suicide, creating the impression that it is an attempt to create meaning from artificial ethical values created by human culture in a universe that doesn't care about those values and where no inherent meaning exists. Ajax, son of Telamon, might as well be slipping in cow dung for all the universe cares. Only people care, and those people are laughing. But at the same time, the absurd defiance of meaninglessness and human impotence that both Ajaxes evince gains nobility through the juxtaposition. Ajax, son of Oileus, may be both fatuous and, in this case, filthy, but he still struggles for honor and dignity despite the absurdity of the universe. He still wants to win that race. General conclusions about Homer's poetry. Homer's songs operate simultaneously on multiple levels. Formulas and epithets carry significances that extend beyond the definitions of their words. The various levels may have very different, even conflicting tenors. They may be both humorous and ironic on one level and deeply tragic on another. Homer can use such layers of meaning to generate multiple tones, evoke particular themes or emotions, guide how his audiences feel about characters or events, suggest characters' motivations or deeper psychologies, or, as in this case, allude to myths that lead audiences to consider the events in reference to their broader mythological context or in light of mythological analogs. And experienced listeners who have listened to Homeric songs repeatedly can develop the skill to understand these idioms of Homeric language and thus glean more from Homeric performances than less experienced listeners. Claims from Part 1 specific to the Iliad. Awkward formulas in the Iliad can be humorous, and you're supposed to laugh. It's okay. There's humor in Homer. The Iliad uses humor as a counterpoint to its overarching tragic vision. Humor in the Iliad underscores human frailty and the inevitability of death, which makes people powerless to resist divine will, is itself an ineluctable misery, and drives people to vie with each other for honor in ways that create still more suffering. The Iliad uses humor mostly in three ways, but never in episodes that are crucial to the plot. 1. Farce, such as we see here. Farce usually involves characters such as Ajax, son of Oileus, and Paris, Alexander, who are all but entirely oblivious to the pains the people around them are suffering and that they themselves cause. The farce may allude to tragic mythological events that give the farce a foreshadowing or echo in play of the tragic events. Divine burlesques of human actions, such as the Battle of the Gods in Book 21, which underscore the fact that the gods suffer no significant lasting consequences due to their immortality, while similar actions would be permanently ruinous for humans. And insult and mockery between warriors that intensify the gruesomeness of war by reducing human lives to merchandise or recasting grisly deaths as playful peacetime activities. Okay. Do we have time to quickly do this, or are we done?
How long do you need?
5 minutes? 10 minutes?
5, okay.
I'll do it quickly. All right. The Odyssey works differently. You may be familiar with Odysseus washing up on the shores of Phaeacia, right? Naked, destitute. And he says, "Woe is me." Now what? So the verses he says evoke the series of lands into which he's arrived previously. He worries that this is going to be another such land. Okay? He hears voices of girls. He sneaks out of the thicket, right? And from the dense wood, he broke an olive branch with a branch of wood with his stout hand in order to cover around his skin the genitals of a man. He's covering his nakedness, right? And I want you to focus on these two phrases. Katie Pakeye, stout hand, always occurs 18 times. Of the times it appears, 13 times it holds a weapon with 2 syllables. Once it grabs a shield. Once it's used as a weapon to hit somebody. Once is somebody in a mock warrior, Ctesippus, throwing a horse hoof. And one time it grabs a key to get a weapon. Meanwhile, these other phrases, perikroi, always occurs in preparation scenes when somebody's about to demonstrate or his own or her own true nature, like arming scenes. Medea. The word in this context means genitals, but when it's in that position, it never means genitals. It always means plans, counsels. So what's going on here? As we continue, Odysseus moved to go like a mountain-raised lion, trusting his strength as he's sneaking up on the girls, which goes through rain upon wind blown, though rained upon and wind blown, in him the eyes burned, but he goes among the cows or sheep or after wild deer. So we get this great lion simile describing him, and his belly compels him, for while trying to get sheep, even into a well-built home to go. This simile, by the way, that describes Odysseus here is verbatim quoting and a simile from the Iliad describing Sarpedon. So Odysseus here is being depicted as a warrior holding a weapon. This is what the formulas lead us to suggest in his stout hand. But notice, in that way, Odysseus with the beautiful haired girls was about mixesthai, to mingle. being very naked indeed. And for those of you, I see some nods, this verb in Greek most often means to have sex with. So notice that the language here, just like Phytomus Ias, the language here, the way it normally is used elsewhere, leads us to imagine this warrior grabbing an implement of power, a weapon, stalking these girls, about to rape them. And mythologically speaking, girls at play with, this is when girls get abducted and raped, right? This is a terrifying scene. But let's look at it actually what's going on. Because notice, the formula Katie Pakaye, stout hand, and other Homeric language Homer uses give the impression through their traditional thematic and contextual usages that Homer is a fierce warrior who grabs a weapon, prepares himself to demonstrate his essential nature through some heroic feat, and moves towards the girls like Sarpedon attacking the Achaean walls in the Iliad. That's the line simile. The implications of the formulas are utterly, outrageously, ridiculously inappropriate to this context, where they only apply that Odysseus has an insatiable lust to have sex with the girls. But as the poetry transforms what should be a weapon, that thing he grabs with his stout hand, into a branch, and Odysseus' plans, his media, become his genitals, and his heroic temper, because Sarpedon's lion had a tumos agenor, heroic temper. For Odysseus, the thing compelling him is his belly. So the heroic temper is replaced by his belly. Stripped of its heroic significance and lowered to the mundane, the language reinforces the reality that Odysseus is in truth a naked, filthy, shipwrecked, and storm-tossed middle-aged man who's been isolated from human contact for 7 years. The poem, though, needs its language to reinforce Odysseus' current state. If Odysseus were the hero the language implies, he would actually enrage the Phaeacians and never return home. The plot demands that the language be redefined. The Odyssey, then, unlike the Iliad, displaces traditional epic formulas from the heroic environments in which they developed and resituates them in a setting where their traditional implications do not fit, or at least require significant readjustment to communicate meaning. This world focuses on endurance and survival rather than kleos, and it redistributes the aristocratic heroic concepts the formulas embody among a broader spectrum of more realistic human, not semi-divine, human characters, including proactive women, slaves, and derelict middle-aged men like Odysseus. Unlike in the Iliad, where humorous deployments of oral poetic structures occur in episodes that are tangential to the main tragic plot, in the Odyssey they regularly highlight essential events in the plot or features of the plot without which Odysseus' Nostos would fail. Rather than deepen the tragic gulf between sublime ideals and human reality, as the Iliad does, the seemingly inappropriate formulaic structures of the Odyssey, which the characters at times even explicitly point out themselves, and I can talk about some examples, and the humor they generate, celebrate our shared human condition by elevating it to heroic status. This is my claim. Odysseus does not succeed despite being a middle-aged derelict, but because of the experience he gained in becoming a middle-aged derelict. The Odyssey celebrates human susceptibility to age, decay, and growth, and redefines, reworks the epic language in order to do so, challenging the viability of those epic conventions that the language encodes. All right, thank you.
Questions? Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Sorry I ran long.
No, that's great. We have a few minutes for questions, so ask away if you want.
Yeah.
What are some examples that you mentioned of the characters explicitly pointing out?
Oh, awesome. A great one, for instance, where Odysseus is disguised as an old man, right, and is lurking among the suitors. And some light comes in from outside and beams off his bald head. And one of the suitors even remarks, says, wow, this guy must be favored by the gods, because look at the radiance he's showing. Remember I mentioned kudos before? Right. So notice how we have that epic convention of the heroic warrior shining, radiating light that the suitor actually sees. But if you think about it, he actually is seeing kudos. because Odysseus only has that bald head and is there with the light radiating off him because Athena disguised him as an old man, as an old beggar. So the suitor is actually pointing out the convention that is here being twisted and repackaged of the radiance of a hero in his Aristeia for Odysseus, the old beggar, who is only there because he has that divine blessing and the divine power. That's one example. Another great example is when Odysseus and Telemachus are storing the spears, and it's dark. And Telemachus says, should we get Eurycleia to bring the lantern so we can see? And he says, no, we don't need to worry about that. And it's true, because heroes normally don't need to worry about this kind of thing. Iliadic heroes never need to worry about whether you see in the dark. But Athena shows up to guide them. Now Athena, gods also normally radiate light, but Athena is carrying a lantern. And Telemachus looks around like, wow, we can see, where's the light coming from? And Odysseus basically says, don't worry about it. That's the way the gods are, don't worry about it. Because he can't see Athena. But Athena's holding a lantern, but he can see the light. So we get this sort of mechanical explanation for what in the Iliad is part of that stock type scene of the gods' appearance and their radiance. That kind of thing is what I'm talking about.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Other questions? Yeah.
Hi. Actually, looking on that picture right there, I really talk about the Katie picture. Like, yeah, you can see the scene, like scene described in the text. Do you think it's fair to like say that way, or do you think there are fair interpretations where we can say like, oh, here's like an art piece, and like we can look at that interpretation of the art from the text and say like we can draw meaning from that, or do you think art itself, or like the art itself of the area is itself exclusive?
That's a really, really tough and loaded question. It's going to vary piece by piece by piece. And many times what we see is the artists have memories of the story but aren't actually working with the texts themselves. I can think in drama particularly, it's often very hard to distinguish between images of tragedy and images of myth from tragedy, because you'll get images that look like they're from a tragedy but the characters are naked, for instance, which the actors would never have been. So the artists are clearly using their imagination and creating this sort of hodgepodge between the tragedy itself and their imagined version of the myth that they experience while watching the tragedy. And I think we can kind of think of the same things here, where I don't think the artists are working from like texts. So they're working from memory, but certainly inspired by scenes that are described in the poem. So this artist, the Nausicaa painter, I think he's clearly imagining this scene. But notice Athena isn't actually present in that scene, but her presence is felt in the scene. She's overseeing everything, but she doesn't actually appear. And so he's representing her presence, if that makes sense, working from his memory and his impressions of the scene. Yeah. Hi.
I'm sorry, this is a comment instead of a question. Is that
Please.
all right?
Yeah.
I just did notice on the side when you compare the two Ajax, it kind of switches Ajax son of the Aurelius and Ajax son of Telamon with like he's the one who gets dumped in Chalcedon with the check marks.
Yeah.
Instead of Ajax son of Aurelius, who it actually happened to.
Boop, 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 boop. Oh, here I'm talking about specifically, thank you for that. Let me clarify. Let's get back to the slide. I'm talking about the stories of their deaths, not the foot race. So in the death of Oileus, this is the only real similarity in the death to the foot race. And the elements of the foot race all appear in the death of Telamonian Ajax. That's what I meant. So this is not a reference to the foot race. This is a reference to how Oileus dies, or the son of Oileus dies. Make sense? Cool. Yeah, of course.
Any other questions here? So I have a question for you, or
Please.
maybe we can go to the very last slide, so just to have something.
The
from
Nausicaa
us.
painter
Yeah,
vase?
let's try that.
There. Whoops. Ack. Let me go back. I can do
Full top.
here, and I can do slideshow from current
from
slide.
current
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, so I really liked how you made this transition from Iliad to Odyssey and how the use of epithets acquire a new vibe.
Yes.
Okay, so this migrant arrives and he has no identity. They don't know who he is.
Mhm.
And so the way that this is gradually built, even in that scene
Yeah.
is how eventually the king, whose daughter is Nausicaa, he starts revealing himself by, at the moment that there is a song, like this song,
Mm-hmm.
at the moment that this song starts being sung to entertain the stranger in the palace of the king of the Phaeacians, gradually he cries,
Yeah.
listening to the story of the Iliadic heroes who fell, and by doing that, he is gradually regaining the identity that he had lost through war,
Mm-hmm.
and he's recognized as a hero that has all of these epithets as part of his own personality. So essentially, he's lost himself during war, and during this time, he is regaining his personality through the memory of the song.
Yeah.
So I wanted
Mhm.
you to kind
Yeah.
of, since we are wrapping this together for everyone, how is it this kind of interesting re-signification of epithets to bring the new realities of the hero coming home, and like in the case of Ajax, you have PTSD, the heroes who attacked
Mm-hmm.
the house because they were so traumatized by war, and this is a traumatized hero who is now a nobody.
Yeah.
Remember in the Odyssey, he's no one, but he will eventually need to acquire the knowledge of old age, the knowledge and wisdom of participating in war, so that he can rejoin his old palace of Ithaca and become the leader of his people, bringing all the experience of war and wisdom through war. So I thought that
That's fantastic. And how he does it by to tie that back into what I was arguing, recreating the language, establishing his own form of epic poetry that reinterprets those heroic epithets in terms that are more suitable for the new world that he's creating, and the new world that he is both creating and navigating through and trying to redefine himself in terms of. Absolutely, and it affects, he reshapes what epic song is
exactly.
to do that.
But I also, in the passage that you have where it's all about his sexual desire,
Yeah.
this is almost as if it's projected by people, and think about our world where you see immigrants who have no identity. So you are afraid of those that come in and they're not civilized because they don't have any of the identity in their own world that identified them as upstanding members of their community. So what you project to them is that this is a naked man who will attack our women.
Yeah.
So I just want you to think of how this could be actually projected as the fear of the young girls who see a man who is hiding his, himself so that he can appear, but essentially he has nothing. Okay, so this man who has nothing will eventually become someone who, by restraining his sexual appetite, through the wisdom that he's acquired, he's going to gradually regain his identity and become somebody to be viewed as an example to emulate rather than to avoid. So I thought that this is, I like all these ancient texts because they give us examples of how we are also projecting onto others our own fears. All right. So thank you so much, guys, for being here. We have a few more minutes. I mean, you know that I'd like to invite you again on our next talk, so please don't miss that one. If you like watching films, the next one is about Rome in Hollywood. So I'll pull up just here the name of the next talk so that you can maybe photograph it or reach out to me, and I'll, is that it? Yeah, there it is. So our next talk is by Professor Monica Cirino, and it's going to be about Roman Hollywood, more or less. So please come. This is going to be at the Amazon Auditorium downstairs, and then we'll have film excerpts, and she'll be discussing that. So again, a huge thank you to our speaker.
Thank you.